I was a legal secretary for a law firm in downtown Portland, and I was set up with a blind date for lunch. And Jim was the blind date, and he called me and invited me, and he said, well, how am I going to know who you are? Because this was a huge law firm. And I said, oh, no problem. I said, you just wait right over there in front of the Norm Thompson store, and I will find you. And what do you look like? And he said, well, I have dark hair and I have a mustache. I said, okay, well, I'll find you. So as I'm coming down the escalator, I see this nice-looking man in front of Norm Thompson's, and I go up to him and I put my hand out to shake hands with him, and I said, I'm Joanne. And he said, okay, well, let's go and have lunch. And when I got back to the law firm, one of my girlfriends asked me, they said, well, gee, Joanne, how was your lunch? Because I had been single for years, over 10. And anyway, I said, I'm going to marry that man.
James Douglas Arney, known to most as Jim, was born on December 9, 1941, to James and Martha Arney. He graduated from Bremerton High School and graduated from the University of Montana in 1965 with his bachelor's in forestry. He continued his education at Oregon State University, getting his master's in 1968 and a PhD in 1972. From a very young age, Jim was passionate about forestry. He loved trees and dedicated his life to managing the health of our forests. As a leading voice in forest biometrics, he pioneered many new technologies that are used today throughout the industry. Jim was kind-hearted and eager to help others succeed. He was a friend to many and was very well respected among his peers. Every question was a good question to Jim, and he had a knack for making a complicated answer easy to understand. Jim Arney lived a significant and impactful life. His legacy will continue in the proper management of our forests and in the memory of those who felt the warmth of his smile and the kindness of his friendship.
Occasionally he said that high school was a waste of time. He knew what he wanted to do. There was no indecision as to what he was going to do. It was always forestry. That was his passion.
All of us family members knew Jim as Jim the Forester and just regular guy Jim. But at his celebration of life, his forester peers really went in depth of Jim's knowledge. He was basically a genius in his field, and to hear about that was just remarkable.
When we got married over on the Cook Islands, we rented a moped, and we got caught in a big heavy rainstorm. And when we rented the moped, I said, have you ever driven one of these before? He said, nope, but we're gonna do it now. And I went, okay, but and that was not out of the ordinary. He was very intuitive and smart, that if he didn't know how to make something work, he'd figure out how it did work.
The guy was an original thinker. Jim was very approachable. Even though you kind of knew he was the smartest guy in the room, he didn't flaunt it, he didn't push it on you. He was good in crowds, liked being around people. And that showed.
One thing about Jim, he really was an optimist, right? There was always a solution. That was Jim. The guy had a smile all the time. I never saw him get angry. Never. It was always problem solving, always trying to figure out how do we pull things together to make this work. That was Jim. Just an optimist when it came to figuring things out.
Jim was really good at details, extremely good at details. As a matter of fact, when we did the Pacific Crest Trail, when we were getting ready to do it, he would send out an email to us with a schematic. It was just so detailed, and as we did go on the trail, things kind of work out a little bit different than on paper, but we laughed, and it was really fun. We had a great time.
Jim decided in his middle 70s that he wanted to get as much of the trail done as he could, and I've always been an active backpacker, and so I told Jim, if you really want to go, I'd go with you. And he took it serious, and next thing I know, there were emails flying, and he asked me if I wanted to invite my son and my daughter-in-law.
The first time I met Jim in person was literally at the trailhead of the Pacific Crest Trail. When I met him, he gave me a big hug, and of course we just started hiking, and it was like he was my grandfather, and he's like an old friend, and that's how I know Jim. And within the first couple hours of backpacking, he would, refer to me as kid, and so that's kind of what I remember of Jim as, hey kid. Just to bring a little light into any conversation. Jim always had a way of doing that.
Jim thought we could do 10 miles a day. I was worried about Jim, but it was pretty tough on me. But Jim did it, and he loved it, wanted to do it again. Jim and I really started to build a real close friendship at that time, and shared a lot of great times on the Pacific Crest Trail.
He really enjoyed the Pacific Crest Trail hikes. I mean, he just enjoyed all the gatherings that he had.
He would ask the most difficult questions. And so I was very much impressed with Jim right from the get-go.
Jim's ideas initially were kind of miles above my knowledge.
When you were studying forest biometrics back then, Jim was already one of the recognized leaders in the profession.
Jim came up with kind of new and very valid ways of kind of approaching forest inventory, and it's probably going to take the profession time to kind of catch up to those ideas.
He was just quantitatively, just a magician with numbers and spreadsheets and analyses. Just an amazing man when it came to, that part of the profession.
Jim was very interested back in 1983 through 85 with all kinds of computers and trying to, at that time, turn the inventory program digital. We were still entering data on cards.
In 1991 or 1992, I ended up getting a job with Simpson Redwood Company in California. And Simpson Redwood Company hired Jim to do an appraisal. So Jim comes into my office, and he's carrying a Dolch luggable computer. And this was back in the day now, 1992. Not many people even had technology like this. Now notice I'm using the word luggable. They were 20 pounds. And he asked me for a bunch of information about the inventory. And so I gave him this information over the course of a day or two. And then he got it all into this Dolch luggable computer. I'm sure he was using his early growth and yield models, inventory programs. And then pretty quickly, he was doing these very complicated analyses and coming up with an appraisal for the California timberlands. Nobody in the day back then was doing stuff like this. Jim, for decades, was working on growth and yield models and forest management software. It's called the Forest Planning and Projection System.
It's not only a growth model, it's an inventory system. You can do everything from compile a timber cruise to do a 100-year growth and yield model runs with.
I think Jim's legacy is everything he did to assemble this, very comprehensive and complete set of programs for forest management.
Jim was very in tune with what was happening to inventory and LIDAR and satellite imagery, what was going to happen, or at least what the future of forestry was going to look like when it came to technology. And he actually predicted back, I would say, in 2018 that satellite imagery and LIDAR was going to modernize not only inventory, but forestry as we know it. And I believe that process is happening right now. And Jim was, that's the kind of person Jim was. He could put multiple different actions or activities together, link it together and say, this is how we can improve forestry. And that's one thing about Jim. He always wanted to improve forestry, and he knew that to improve forestry, you had to have good inventory and good data to make those decisions.
There's lots to admire, but Jim was extremely intelligent, which I respected his intelligence, integrity, honest, trustworthy. I could trust him because I had been in a situation years before where trust was not something that I had. So I really appreciated that in him, but his integrity was just impeccable. I loved him dearly. He was my knight in shining armor.
Jim always had kind of an infectious laugh. He was always smiling and laughing, and he was just jovial and so easy to be with. He could just joke around and just be lighthearted, and that was so nice. He was easy to be around. I never saw him get angry or stressed out. He was so totally organized, but if it didn't go that particular way, it was okay, and he would move on to what would work. And he was just, he would bend like the trees.
He loved forestry. He loved forest management. He wanted people to do the best job that they could managing their timberlands. That's what Jim really wanted. That was his passion. Let's manage these lands properly. And that's why he put so much effort into this forest management software. He wanted to make that information available to people so that they could make really good decisions. Because, there's a lot we can do to improve the management of forestry. So I think that's what Jim really wanted to do. He wanted the forests, particularly of the Pacific Northwest, to be managed to their fullest potential. And I think he did a great job.
He used the terms in a private journal, "I love forestry." He was dedicated to the forest industry, and he wanted the industry to succeed, and his whole legacy was just basically of protecting the trees.
He educated so many of us. Good job, Jim.